Hello and welcome to another episode of Interpreting India. 2021 has been defined by a deadly second wave of COVID-19, precarious geopolitical relations, and a rapidly evolving technological landscape. This season, we at Carnegie India are examining many of the challenges and opportunities that India will confront in the coming decade. I'm your host, Priya, and this week we will take a look at the cryptocurrency space in India. Before we begin, though, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Carnegie India's flagship event, the Global Technology Summit, themed Global Meets Local. Join us this year from 14th to 16th December to discuss and deliberate on contemporary issues like encryption, cybersecurity, sustainability, public health, fintech, and more with policymakers, entrepreneurs, and professionals from across the world. I would encourage you to visit our specially curated website, gts2021.com, to register and check out the latest agenda, speakers list, and other resources. The website is also linked in the description. In early 2020, the Supreme Court of India overturned the Reserve Bank's circular, which prohibited regulated financial entities like banks from dealing with cryptocurrency-related activities. Following this decision, cryptocurrency purchases in the country have soared. According to a recent Chainalysis Global Cryptocurrency Adoption Index, India ranks second worldwide. India has also clocked a higher share of activity in the decentralized finance or DeFi space, a fast emerging use case of cryptocurrencies, according to Chainalysis. World over, cryptocurrencies have reached a market cap of more than $2.5 trillion in little over a decade since Satoshi Nakamoto, the person or persons who remain anonymous to this day, released the white paper on Bitcoin and set off this wild ride. But the rapid rise in cryptocurrencies is met with concern from the government and regulators, especially due to their price volatility and lack of transparency. In the last month itself, the squid-game token fiasco led to massive losses for the investors of this cryptocurrency. In recognition of these concerns, the Union government in India has listed a bill to be tabled at the winter session of the parliament slated to begin next week. As per its description, the bill seeks to prohibit all private cryptocurrencies, although with some exceptions, to promote the underlying technology of cryptocurrency and its uses. The bill also seeks to provide a facilitative framework in favor of an official digital currency to be issued by the RBI. In this episode of Interpreting India, we will analyze the Indian cryptocurrency landscape primarily through the lens of policy and regulation. What sort of investors characterize India's cryptocurrency space? How could a renewed ban on all private cryptocurrencies play out? And finally, what does the global growth of cryptocurrencies indicate for the future of India's financial system? Joining us today to discuss these questions is Tanvi Ratna. Tanvi is the Chief Executive Officer of Policy 4.0, a research and policy advisory firm. She is also a global blockchain and cryptocurrency policy advisor with extensive experience working in the global regulatory environments of world's leading blockchain hubs. For her work in blockchain policy, she was awarded a prestigious fellowship at the New America Foundation in Washington, D.C. She has had a long career of advising global decision makers, including the U.S. Foreign Affairs Committee on Capitol Hill, as well as ministries and state governments in India on policy. Tanvi's organization has also recently released a paper proposing an innovative approach for crypto regulation in India called the India Wallet. Tanvi, welcome to Interpreting India. Delighted to have you with us today. Congratulations on your new paper. It's both informative and, shall I say, timely as well.
Thank you very much, Priya. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, let's start with a little bit of background for our listeners, Tanvi. Can you tell us a little bit about how the cryptocurrency market and ecosystem in India have evolved over the last decade? And in parallel, how have the Indian government and regulatory bodies dealt with the growth of cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, thanks, Priya. I think that's a very big question. I will try to do justice to that. So I think the origins of everything starts in India around 2013. That's when, the first sort of Bitcoin clubs and enthusiasts start really coming up. That's also when the RBI starts releasing its first few circulars saying that this is not recognized activity. This is not legal tender. It is in no way regulated by the RBI. So you are at risk with these instruments. And this is a series of notifications that they come out with continuously until about 2017 or so. And around this time in 2013, the industry hasn't been an industry so much. It has been, some enthusiasts. People start buying Bitcoin. I think trading also is not that big an industry globally at that point. If you remember, around that period was when there was a Silk Route scandal where the FBI had, found a darknet marketplace, and crypto is generally seen as this very fringe and sort of problematic currency, and there wasn't much to it apart from some enthusiasts. And then I think you see after 2016-17, when the price of Bitcoin really started rising, is when you started having the first few exchanges. So there were a few early players, and I think some of them are fairly good exchanges, and they were mostly not not trading as many kinds of coins and things as you see today. But it had become a fairly robust business model, and there were more players getting into the space. But it was just exchanges at that time. I don't think there was much by way of developers and technical activity. And then this had really started taking off in 2017. So globally, there was this ICO boom. And you would have heard of a lot of ICO scams and a lot of projects. Many countries started, clamping down on a variety of irrational activity that they felt in the space. So 2018, Bitcoin's price had peaked and ICOs had peaked, and the SEC started a whole round of subpoenas, hauled in over 80 projects, I think, within a week. And you saw many governments cracking down, in Korea, in Japan, and all these places. And in India, what happened is we didn't see that sort of a crackdown, which was going like player by player, or regulators were sort of enforcing action on players. That didn't happen. But you did see in 2018 directly this circular from the RBI, where they sort of overnight placed a prohibition on what Indian banks could do with any kind of crypto service, right? And that was a very wide and sweeping prohibition, and it came overnight, but it didn't come out of nowhere, because India had just that week witnessed one of its biggest scandals in cryptocurrency, and that was the Amit Bharadwaj scam. And right after this, at the back of all this tightening regulation, you saw the RBI circular. But that circular, I think, really sent shockwaves. And I remember at the point I was working with some of the state governments, and we were working on blockchain. We just concluded the largest hackathon in India with, there were blockchain DLT folks, but there were also crypto folks, lots of enthusiasm about what Bangalore could be in this ecosystem. And within a week, you had this, circular. And then, even the governments didn't know what to do. And at that point, I think, a lot of things happened suddenly in the industry. So over the next year, I would say that there were very much those chilling effects of regulation, right? And I think that whole year, you could see a sort of freeze that had happened, right? There were some businesses that survived, which are now quite big, like Wazirex and things, which basically managed to find loopholes or workarounds or peer-to-peer channels. People managed somehow through these OTC desks and things. But I think activity was very crippled, and it was quite limited. I mean, investment and everything was sort of shriveling into India. And at that point, globally, what had happened is that a lot of countries were coming out with their laws, right? They had started coming out with proper regimes, and money started really flowing into crypto. But it did not come to India because we didn't have a regime. And then the industry didn't really have a recourse, I guess, or that's what they felt, but they moved this case, and I think we all know what happened with that case. It was a very long process, took 2 years. But in the end, the circular that the RBI came out with was struck down. And in the meantime, on the government side, there had already been 2 interministerial committees that had been constituted. And in 2019 is when that report finally came out in public domain, which stated very clearly a full ban on cryptocurrency. So I think I'll stop with a lead up to the Supreme Court case, because I know we'll probably explore that in some detail. So I think after the Supreme Court case, there's been a different environment.
Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because I was looking up some statistics, and I think by some estimates, there are about 1.5 crore or 15 million retail investors in cryptocurrencies in India. So it seems to me that there is massive popularity today. So has the situation changed? And can you also tell us a little bit about which segments of our population are the biggest investors in the space today? And in the absence of the government itself putting out any data on this, how reliable do you think these numbers are?
Yeah, I think that's a lot of good questions, right? And I think coming to this data point, I would maybe just start there, because what has happened in India is from the start, you've not had regulatory oversight over this industry, right? Which is a bit strange, right? If you have a problematic industry, the first thing you want to do is put some kind of ring fencing there. You want to put some kind of reporting. But I think the challenge has been that, the minute you do that, you also give legitimacy to this industry, right? And they have used that at many times. Like even the Supreme Court case, the verdict was sort of touted everywhere as a sign of giving legitimacy to the industry. So I think there has been this vacuum from the regulator side, and I think that has sort of, I think there's acknowledgement that has sort of led to where we are today. But there basically isn't any data apart from what you're told is the data, right? And that's where, that was also one of the motivations for the solution we came up with. But at the moment, user data is fully under the purview of exchanges, and it's what they tell you is what you know. There's no auditing of this. Even if you could do any blockchain auditing, which is fairly transparent, like you can audit ledgers in cryptocurrency, you can understand activity, but these are all centralized exchanges, so their holdings and their operations are not known. They're quite opaque. So you don't really have any sense of accurate data. But there was a very inflated number that came in the newspapers. But since then, I think the industry has been coalescing around 1 to 2 crore user figure for India for now. But yes, in terms of activity that happened after the Supreme Court verdict, a lot of things started happening simultaneously. So in the industry itself, a lot of the exchanges which had stuck around started getting more investment, right? And what was also happening globally around crypto is in the year of 2020 is when you had the rise of DeFi, which is decentralized finance. And that became like a huge wave of its own. And now it is the more predominant form of crypto activity. And that saw tremendous growth, right? I think within a week, you had, multiple millions move into it. Within a year, you had 100 billion move into it, right? And that is a huge amount of capital. And a lot of the developers for it, a lot of the great developers, I would say are from India, right? And it may not be recorded anywhere, but there has been capital that's moved from there. And after the Supreme Court verdict, you saw a sort of next generation of projects come up. So you had the elders sort of who had survived through that period. And then they also mentored new teams, and there was also a lot more capital, and you had DeFi, and you had new business models, right? Because crypto has not had too many business models before this. Now it has like too many to name, right? Because so much can be monetized. So you saw a huge growth. I would say there are actually, even if we just look at last year, there would at least be 10 to 12, I think around 18 projects that received very high quality funding, very high quality projects from all the major investors in the space, the Sequoia or the the Paradigm or Polychain. All these are big funds in the space. So yeah, I think now the activity is very, very fast, and I think India is definitely seen as one of the biggest rising sort of centers for this. But yes, in terms of data, I think your guess is as good as mine.
What segments of population do you think are the biggest investors, though, apart from the big names that you mentioned, which are institutional? When it comes to population or retail investors, who's actually investing in the space? Who's actually trading? Would you have any sense of it?
I think a few months ago, I would have told you clearly that, it's a certain type of investor, young, high risk appetite, good technical understanding, very savvy with, the basics you need here are not like charts and reports. You need Reddit and Discord and all these other communities to understand what's good. But I think now I don't know who isn't in it. Like now I like just as of last month. I mean, I've had my parents ask me about which coins are good. I've had my grandparents debate, that is this a good investment or not? People who meet me for the first time, I mean, we never even get past, the first question, and then the question immediately is, what should I invest in, right? The minute they know that I work in the space, that's what they ask. So now I don't know. I think now it's sort of blurring. But I do think the majority of people who have invested or maybe hold, let's say, maybe more than 50% of their investments in crypto, I think would be very much the younger generation, simply because it's a fairly difficult space to navigate, right? Like if you are a traditional stock investor and you read you read news from certain sites and you track certain charts and you do your due diligence, like that somewhere goes for a toss here, right? Because there's some rumor in some Telegram group, and then the price spikes like 70,000%, right? So you can't keep up with it if you are very used to the traditional ways. I think that becomes a barrier to people. You might club all that under education, but I think it's also a matter of culture. It's not just about investor education.
I know what question I have for you after the podcast, but leaving that aside, I think I think this is a good question now to possibly address, which is what factors led to the RBI's prohibition on banks in 2018? What kind of risks did they perceive that led them down that road? And maybe, after that, you could also explain a little bit about what factors then led to the quashing of the circular by the Supreme Court. Why didn't they sort of agree with the RBI?
Yeah, so I think the Supreme Court's reasoning has been very transparent, and they've put it out there. From the RBI's perspective, I mean, there's some things I can say. I mean, we have had the fortune of being a part of, some of these deliberations. As also a member of the RBI MPC who's on our board of our think tank. But I think the monetary concerns RBI has also been fairly vocal about. So there are a couple of them, right? So crypto is quite problematic from a monetary perspective. And now you will see a lot more countries echoing this, not just the RBI, because as of this year, now many central banks are are raising the alarm on this as a monetary and financial stability risk. So the first risk I would say under monetary issues is, of course, financial stability, right? This is an asset class that has no link to your real economy, right? You don't know who controls it. It has no productive power for your economy the way that the financial sector does, right? So when you have a lot of savings getting diverted to this asset class, it sort of works like draining the swamp, right? Like it just, you're taking the money out of the economy, but it's going somewhere where it can't then be redirected or it can't be leveraged in any way. So at least in the financial sector, when I have savings going into banks, I can convert that into lending, and then I have a monetary transmission process, and then that can get that has that money multiplier effect, right? Like, what do you do with crypto, right? And what happens when substantial money starts going in there? And then what they are creating is a fully parallel financial system to yours, right? So I think for any central banker, it's fairly obvious that this is not something we can have, right? You're basically feeding the beast, if you're allowing this. So I think that is the most obvious concern. And I think now there's not a single central bank in the world I know that embraces crypto, apart from the ones that don't have their own monetary policy, like El Salvador, which is a dollarized country, right? So I think financial stability is the most obvious one. The second one, which I think applies a lot more to countries like us, and is around convertibility of currency. There are multiple risks, right? So if you see, apart from about 17 countries in the world, most have some form of capital controls. And we are, of course, a very prime example of such a country that has capital controls. And they're there for good reason, because we have high exchange rate risk, right? So you want to very much stabilize the exchange rate. And for that, you can't have too much external supply around your money. So I think that has been probably more tricky, because there's been absolutely no precedent of what can be done around that. There again, I feel like that was also one of the motivations for the model that we built. And we've been hearing a lot from other central bankers in Latin America and places like that, which are also very worried about this, that this will be something useful. So how do you manage exchange rate risk? How do you manage how much capital moves in and out of your economy? And then the most touted one, again, is just the basic KYC, money laundering risk. Who is this money going to? Is that recipient even in your borders, or it's someone external? The cross-border flow, the KYC, like all of these are as big risks, because is it becoming an avenue for money laundering? Because it is fairly pseudonymous. And the challenge has been that nothing you've done for the last 50 odd years, 50, 70 years seems to be helpful right now as a tool, right? How do you even impose those things? And so it's a fairly difficult problem. It's not something that you can solve looking back. And I think to dedicate that much of policy time and that much attention of a policy agenda to this has also not been there for a while, right? It has not been a priority issue for a long time. I mean, we've been struggling with COVID for the last, years. I mean, it's eaten up every priority there is.
And the Supreme Court didn't really seem to agree with the RBI then. I think the judgment was delivered in March last year. Why didn't they agree with the RBI's perception or sense of what the risks were around cryptocurrencies?
Yes, I think the Supreme Court verdict, I think, is by far the finest document yet that has come out in India on any sort of policy thought process, right? So I think the Supreme Court said many interesting things. The first point where I felt they agreed actually with the RBI is they said this is currency. right? It doesn't matter what you're calling it in any other country. We don't know why we are playing a pretense of calling it an asset or a utility. Let's be real, this is money, okay? I found that very, very refreshing and very direct, right? And they spent many pages elaborating that. Then I think the other interesting thing, now when they started talking about why this circular was not a right move, I think they made many important points, right? The first, they said, as you said rightly, there wasn't empirical data to show that this was in fact harming the economy. So you're saying that there is financial stability risk. Most central banks have done assessments to judge that, right? Like the IMF itself does assessments to judge that. And this year, incidentally, they have for the first time listed cryptocurrency as an identified risk to financial stability. But there was no data as such here in the Indian case. There was no study. The RBI, even in its own submissions to the court, has nowhere been able to highlight that. Like, how do you make the case that there is financial stability risk, right? And for that, you actually need to start monitoring the activity. Otherwise, you can't make that case. So it's been a sort of vicious cycle. That was the first one. I think also the second thing they said is you did not look at options, right? One of the grounds on which they struck it is on the proportionality ground, right? Was this a proportional measure to the threat that was stated, right? Where were the options you considered, right? Why would you go straight to this sort of a prohibition? There's no justification for that. Yes, but then I think, I do think they sort of created a ripe backdoor in a way for the sort of legislation we're seeing now, because they said quite clearly that that this is only holding because there isn't a law in the land, and the day there is a law, this is not going to hold, and we are not going to challenge that law. Like, we are not going to hear any pleas to challenge that law, because we could be doing that for every single law in the country, and that's not our job. I think the Supreme Court very much on a very thin ground of a violation of your constitutional right to business and trade, which is I think Article 19(1)(g). On that ground is the justification which they struck it down, and they call this an unproportional measure taken by the RBI.
I think, though, that the RBI is in a position to demonstrate the harm empirically today, because we just discussed the rise of cryptocurrencies in India, right? There have been a lot of investments, a lot more investors. So, what's your sense? Because we do have a bill that is probably going to be tabled at the winter session, and it does, from its description, it says that it seeks to prohibit all private cryptocurrencies, maybe with some exceptions for the underlying technology and its uses. So is RBI in a position to demonstrate the harm much more in a more effective manner than it was able to at the Supreme Court?
I think that's a very good question to which I don't unfortunately have an answer, but my guess would be that in the absence of even basic data of how many people are using it and what volumes they are moving into this, it's very hard to make that case, right? You need at least that much information. And when you're making it at an RBI level, it can't be based on guesstimates, right? It has to be actual empirical information. So I'm not very sure of that. But I mean, if the case is being made at a global level, then yes, there is some precedent. But I also think in this case, see the angle that sometimes get, like when you have this national security angle to things, right? Then a lot of like, and we've seen this around the world, right? A lot of things which are assumed fundamental rights and which can be argued on other grounds sort of go out of the window, right? If you're saying that my sovereignty is at stake as a nation, then well, nothing else is a bigger argument than that, right? But yes, I think I do think the challenge of regulating this, I think there's understanding that it may not be completely impossible to stop this from happening. Like if you do thoroughly ban any users in payments of any sort, right, and you put penalties on that, and you maybe allow the trading or these activities to happen, that's one way that people are thinking about it. I think also the way we have proposed by having these identified wallets and maybe placing some caps in terms of financial stability, that's another way to possibly also tackle it.
And you talked about the chilling effect that the RBI circular had when it was released, and now we have potentially a bill that might be passed in the winter session. So what effect do you think the bill is going to have? And is this the end of the road for cryptocurrencies?
I think we're still a bit premature to comment on that because the bill draft has not really been released. It hasn't even reached the parliament yet. So we don't know what final shape they have taken. But I think this time there has been some attention on exemptions that, there is just a tiny phrase in there which talks about exemptions. And I think there might be some assets exempted. There are some plans from the offshoring center to do things. But yes, overall, I don't see it as being a bill that really embraces this technology in a major way.
But we'll have to see the text, is what you're saying.
Yes.
And on the bill itself, I just want you to comment a little bit upon the phrase private cryptocurrencies. What are private cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, I think this is a fairly standard phrase. I'm not sure why there's any confusion. I don't think there's any confusion about what it means. I mean, private cryptocurrencies are simply a non-sovereign currency. So anything that is not the rupee is a private currency. This is a term that's also been used globally by the FATF or other regulators. I'm not sure that this is really a point of debate.
So essentially, anything that's not a central bank issued digital currency is a private cryptocurrency.
Yes.
So moving on then, while we have possibly a bill on this in the coming weeks, is there an alternate way to regulate cryptocurrencies? What are some of the challenges that such an alternate means of regulation could encounter? And what I sort of wanted you to delve into a little bit is, how have you tackled this in your latest publication?
Yeah, I think this is where this is where a lot of the attention should really focus on in the public debate, because we've spent years talking about who issues it and what it is. But I think the first premise for us in even building this publication was this whole question of what is the asset? How do we fit it into our old frameworks? This is the hardest question by far, right? It's not something that's just been hard for India. I mean, we still have debates in the US about whether the Ripple is a security or a commodity, right? There's a lot of debates now about whether most, like Uniswap, is a security. Like a lot of tokens are now going to come into those questions. I mean, it's not an easy question to answer because, this token was not made thinking about your old frameworks, right? This is a very different asset type, and the way it works, the things it can do, the way it can change its function depending on the technological context is very different from what traditional financial assets do. I very much believe that you have to start by understanding what this is, and then you can build a decent approach, right? If you start from the filter of let's try and fit it into something, you'll always fall short in your regulatory exercise. So we stepped back from this question and we said this question has to be tackled. We 100% understand it has to be tackled because somewhere your whole regulatory apparatus is geared for that. But maybe it's not the first thing we look at, right? Maybe we phase out our approach. And first we look at how we can tackle this rather than what it is, how we ring fence it, how we actually enforce or even manage any regulation on it. And for that, we worked with the first premise of the technology itself, which is that every single asset, no matter what it is just a pair of cryptographic keys. It doesn't matter if it's a Bitcoin, it doesn't matter if it's an NFT, it doesn't matter if it's $1 million in crypto, it doesn't matter if it's $10. All it is in reality is just a public key and a private key. And everything you are enabled to do in crypto is because of these two things. So you own the asset when you own the private key. You're able to send it anywhere to anyone when you own the private key. You're able to sign into different applications, even in decentralized finance, if you have a public address and you have a wallet. And everything around these keys is enabled by this piece of infrastructure called the wallet. So crypto wallet is very essential. It becomes a sort of gateway. It becomes your sort of passport, your identity, your signing authority, and all operations are undertaken from this level. So we said, if this is a piece of critical infrastructure, why don't you start by ring fencing that? And why don't you just, it's a very simple piece of infrastructure. You can easily integrate KYC on this, because I think in India, we underestimate what we are capable of doing as a state, and we overestimate the complexity of the problem. And I think we have underestimated the power of something like India Stack in dealing with cryptocurrency, because this is a fully digital asset and you have a fully digital identity. And when you merge the two, there's really not much left in terms of anonymity, or this is a fully transparent asset where the ledger is transparent, where what you're doing, where you're sending it to is transparent. So we said, make a KYC wallet. It's a very simple solution. Once you make a KYC wallet, you do two things. One is, obviously, you know who's doing what. Your issues around data and activity and all those go away in one go. But you also define a jurisdiction on crypto activity. Right? So you define a jurisdiction on what is otherwise a completely decentralized activity. So all the activity that goes from these India wallets is Indian activity. And when the money flows to any other wallet, that counts as a cross-border activity. Right? And then, yes, then you get into the questions of, well, how does it limit other routes and things like that? And then there are other checks we built into our proposal for that.
Right. So what you're saying is that the key to regulating cryptocurrencies is a key.
Yes.
So essentially, possibly the current approaches in terms of putting cryptocurrencies in little cubby holes, whether it's asset or commodity or utility tokens or whatever, is not going to benefit very much. So just get down to the basics and ring fence the wallet is what you're saying, right? But on the other hand, I mean, how do you stop, whether it's exchanges or other operators from offering an unregulated wallet to me, or from me using an unregulated wallet? That's still possible. You could still have, undesirable activities being conducted via that route.
Yes, and I think the key thing to understand is that all activity that needs a link to the rupee, like once you're moving from the Indian economy into the crypto economy, that whole process is ring-fenced by the wallet, right? So once that becomes the only legitimate channel for you to interact with the crypto economy. Anything else you do, which right now is also at risk of being deemed black money, but once you have created a legitimate channel, then any other routes you take will get deemed black money most probably. And there are already they're actually stricter provisions than what I'm saying that are being contemplated in the bill. Like we think this is probably a more lighter touch approach. But you have one channel. This channel allows you to work with any part of the crypto ecosystem, whether it's a DeFi platform or it's an exchange or it's a NFT gateway. It works for pretty much every form of activity in crypto, which actually links to your first question, which is what's the drawback in focusing on different kinds of tokens? Well, the drawback is that this keeps mutating, right? Today you have 3 kinds of tokens. Now, when I look at updated classifications of tokens, there are 12 types, or this will become 20 types maybe in some years, and then you will keep making new laws and you will keep retraining your regulators and keep introducing new compliance, because you are sort of constantly trying to fit what is new into what is old, right? And that's I think a harder problem, right? Whereas if you take the Indian approach, where we've done it with other problems, we've built some tech infrastructure, and then we've built some ring fencing regulation. So you build a wallet, around it you build regulation that this is the legitimate channel. You can easily integrate with the Indian banking system if you do this. Once you get KYC, you can get this wallet. And then in a way, it sort of legalizes what becomes your channel, right? But does it mean that other wallets go away? No. But it's just that now when you move from this wallet into any other wallet, crypto is a very difficult technology to do illegitimate activity with, actually, because it's a completely traceable technology. So if I am in a KYC wallet and I'm trying to then launder that money and move it into like a MetaMask or something, well, once you have any point in that chain is identified, then it's very easy for forensics to track anything that's illegitimate. So once you have robust KYC happening, even if it's for 80% of users, what that gives is, at a forensic level, you will be able to protect up to, 99% of the users, because there will always be links in transactions between wallets that are here in the India wallet and any other wallets that are being used in the world. So at the moment, even without KYC, to a large extent, they are able to identify it. So if you build infrastructure, which is sort of a universally KYC'd infrastructure, then there's very little that can really go wrong out of the Indian crypto ecosystem. And I think what it will take, of course, is that capacity building at the law enforcement agency level. But I think there is some readiness to sort of build that.
Right. That was my next question actually for you. You mentioned an interesting point about how the regulators will have to train themselves as crypto sort of mutates. So the next question was going to be, how should the regulators prepare for your idea of creating an India wallet and then regulating that to ring fence the risks around cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, I think that's still a great question, because at the moment, the challenge you have is I don't think there is a single regulator in India which is sort of ready to take on this responsibility, right? Because it's a huge responsibility. A lot can go wrong and a lot can just, sort of be blamed on them, right? But what I will say is, this is a multi-dimensional asset. We had actually given a recommendation that, you should ideally have a joint working group of sorts established between different players. You could call it a separate regulator. I don't think that makes sense, because at the end of the day, they will be dividing themselves up into the same verticals of function as the existing regulators, right? They will be looking at securities, and so unless your legal framework is fully changing, it doesn't make sense to have a separate regulator. But even if you have a task force or something that, most countries have done this. They have this hub and spoke model. They create a hub where different regulators start working together on this. And within 2 years, they've built capacity even within their own agencies. Then they start building internal teams. And this has happened in the US as well. Like there was a CFTC hub, there was the SEC hub. And now these have sort of taken off as either their own verticals or, they've sort of built capacity inside the organization. I think that's a very good approach. I think with this India wallet, what we are creating in a way is you're creating a common platform, right? So every regulator basically has to plug into this right? And they all have different roles and responsibilities, which can be fairly easily defined on this, right? And if you create a task force, what you can do is create a very agile body, right? So you don't need to pre-prescribe everything, which has generally been the tendency. It's very difficult to enforce in this sort of a situation where, the technology is evolving very fast, and it's not really evolving just in India, right? It's happening globally, and that sort of flows into India. So you can't predefine everything, but you can create this single window system of sorts where different people can plug in. You can have joint working groups. You can have, issue-based working groups. Like you can have people looking at illicit activity. You can have people looking at, NFTs or, looking at KYC issues or, there are a lot of things. I think also the custody of assets is a huge thing where, that's not a proposal that we talked about here, but basically how do you manage at an institutional level such huge asset sizes. So I think all these can be issues dealt with. I think around those we have very solid frameworks already from the SEBI. But yes, the idea was how do you bring this from a decentralized, completely, something that's just flowing in all directions. How do you give it a channel, right, from where it can flow, right? And I think then that creates the right platform for a lot of things to get streamlined.
Right. And is there a precedent for this, Tanvi, the approach that you have recommended?
I think there's not many countries that could have attempted something like this just because they don't have the kind of digital ID infrastructure that we have. They also don't have the culture of building tech the way we have, right, with UPI and DigiLocker and things like that, right? This is not infrastructure that exists in most countries. So I do think this is somewhere more an Indian ethos to sort of look at technology this way, regulate fintech in this way. And I think this is actually, when we started this, we felt, there's a lot of chatter in like media debates where, Singapore has done this and we should just follow what other countries are doing and things like that. But it's like, wait, nobody's actually solved your problem, which is your exchange rate risk or your capital controls or things like that. So India will have to innovate its approach. Like there's really nothing you can take and copy paste, which will, and then solves all your problems. So this is something we feel is will be more like an Indian model to this. And if this takes off, its repercussions are global because now every central bank needs a solution to look at financial stability. And the way people look at Aadhaar and things now in terms of infrastructure, they might then start looking at this wallet as a sort of new generation idea that India has pioneered.
It's an interesting approach, Tanvi. Thank you so much for joining us today and for all your insights on cryptocurrency space in India.
Thank you very much, Priya. It was great to be in this conversation.
We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. To make sure you don't miss it, do subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts from. You can also find us on social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'll also be hosting many such conversations and panels at the Global Technology Summit. So be sure to register at gts2021.com. Thank you for listening in. See you next time.